Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if we're truly alone? It's one of those timeless questions that has fascinated humanity for generations. From ancient legends to modern radar data, the idea that something or someone might be visiting us from beyond the stars continues to stir our imagination. Today, we're diving into the top 5 UFO sightings that still baffle even the most skeptical experts. These aren't just blurry photos or shaky videos, these are real encounters, witnessed by military personnel, pilots, radar operators, and even entire towns. No easy explanations, no clear answers, just mystery. Get ready to open your mind, because some of what you're about to hear might challenge what you thought you knew about the world. Let's begin. It all starts with a radar ping and a curious silence. In 2004, off the coast of Southern California, something strange happened, something that still leaves military officials scratching their heads today. It was a clear day, routine Navy operations were underway, and nobody expected the unimaginable. But then, radar systems began picking up fast-moving objects flying too high, too low, and too fast to be anything known to aviation. The USS Princeton, part of the Nimitz carrier strike group, had just picked up what would become one of the most infamous UFO sightings in modern history, the Tic Tac incident. Now, the reason this case hit so hard isn't just because of the object itself fit us, because of who saw it and how. These weren't civilians with telescopes or curious people filming stars. These were trained Navy pilots, people with thousands of flight hours, tested under pressure.com in crisis. When Commander David Fravor and his wingman were vectored to intercept the unidentified craft, they expected maybe a rogue drone. What they encountered was something else entirely. From the air, Fravor reported a smooth, white object hovering above the ocean, erratically moving, in ways that defied all known physics. No wings, no rotors, just a strange, oblong object like a tic-tac candy darting back and forth above the waves. Then suddenly shooting into the sky and vanishing in seconds. It didn't make sense. The pilot's own words. It accelerated like nothing I've ever seen. And these are people who've seen everything that flies. Even more unsettling. The radar operators on the USS Princeton had been tracking these objects for days. Multiple pings, consistent readings, the same flight patterns, appearing and disappearing, moving from 80,000 feet to sea level in seconds. You can dismiss one witness, maybe even two. But how do you dismiss trained professionals backed by military-grade technology? It wasn't just visual, it was technical, observable, and documented. That's the part that makes even the most hardened skeptics stop and think. Now, let's pause for a second and reflect on what this means. Because this isn't just about little green men or flying saucers. It's about the possibility that there are things operating in our skies that we daren't understand. Things that don't fit into our current models of flight, propulsion, or material science. That should scare us a little bit more than that. It should fascinate us. And just when you think it couldn't get stranger, years later, the Pentagon itself confirmed the video of this encounter taken from the targeting systems of the Navy jets. Grainy footage. Sure, but you can clearly see the object locking into the sensors, shifting direction with sudden bursts, dancing in a way that no human-made aircraft could ever replicate. The Department of Defense didn't say what it was, but they didn't say what it wasn't either. The thing is, the term UFO tends to bring up images of conspiracy theories and science fiction. But when you look at an event like the Tic Tac encounter, it's hard to wrap it up in fantasy. This is documented. It's not just speculation. It's part of an official Navy report. When you have radar data, visual confirmation, and infrared targeting footage, all pointing to the same bizarre object, the mystery becomes harder to ignore. And this isn't an isolated incident. In the years since the 2004 encounter, more and more pilots, military and commercial, have come forward with similar stories. Objects that hover, move erratically, accelerate instantly, and disappear. They don't follow known aerodynamics. They defy inertia. It's like watching physics break in real time. What makes it even more thought-provoking is how quickly these sightings are often dismissed in public discourse. For years, reports like these were buried or laughed off. Pilots feared ridicule. Radar operators kept quiet. But in the last decade, there's been a shift. Governments are taking this seriously now. Task forces have been created. Reports are being written. Congressional hearings are happening. This isn't about aliens. It's about the unknown. The Tic Tac UFO stands as a cornerstone of modern unexplained aerial phenomena. It challenges not only what we know about aircraft but also about our assumptions of what is possible. And here's the key question. If that object wasn't ours and no known nation claims it, then whose was it? Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't whose at all. Could it be that our planet is being observed? Could it be that there's a level of intelligence far beyond ours? One that doesn't reveal itself, but watches, occasionally showing up just long enough to remind us how little we really understand. It's this humility, this willingness to admit we don't have all the answers, that keeps the Tic Tac incident alive in expert circles. Not because we want to believe, but because sometimes, the facts themselves leave us no other choice but to wonder. And maybe, just maybe, Wondering is the first step toward truth. If you've ever heard of Rendlesham Forest, you probably already know it's often called Britain's Ross. But what actually happened there? And why does this decades-old mystery continue to haunt military records and the minds of those who were there? Let's go back to December 1980, to a cold and quiet night in Suffolk, England. It was just after Christmas. Two American air bases, Saraf, Bentwaters, and RAF, Woodbridge War, operating under joint control with the United States Air Force. These weren't small, sleepy outposts. They were important NATO bases, loaded with security protocols and highly trained personnel. Not exactly the kind of place where people start chasing lights in the woods for fun. It all started when strange lights were seen descending into the nearby forest. Thinking it might be a downed aircraft, a few servicemen were dispatched to investigate. What they found, however, was far from a plane crash, according to their official reports and later interviews. The airmen encountered a glowing metallic object, hovering silently among the trees. It was smooth, triangular in shape, covered in strange symbols that resembled hieroglyphs. As they approached it, the object allegedly emitted a pulsing light and then lifted silently into the air, vanishing through the trees with speed that seemed impossible. You might think, oh, okay, that's weird, but people make mistakes. Sure, but what makes this case especially haunting is that the sightings didn't stop there. Over the next 2 nights, multiple personnel, including Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, the deputy base commander, witnessed similar phenomena. Halt even brought a tape recorder with him to document what they saw. Beams of light shining down from the sky, objects darting through the trees, the air charged with static, like a thunderstorm was building but never came. On that tape, you can hear real-time astonishment in their voices. Not panic, these were trained military men, but honest, raw confusion. Halt would later write an official memo to the Ministry of Defense, outlining the event. In it, he described the lights, the metallic craft, the radiation readings that were taken from the supposed landing site, and the strange impressions found in the soil, 3 indentations forming a perfect triangle. That document has since become one of the most talked about UFO reports in British history. But here's where things get even more bizarre. Years later, some of the witnesses began to recall even stranger details. One of the airmen, Jim, claimed he touched the object and received what he described as a binary code download into his Minda stream of 1 south and 0 south that he couldn't stop seeing until he wrote it down in a notebook. That code, when analyzed by some enthusiasts years later, was said to include coordinates to ancient, mysterious locations around the world, including the Great Pyramid and the Nazca Lines. Now, let's be clear. This part veers into controversial territory. Some consider the binary code story to be a stretch, or perhaps a later addition to the original narrative, but it raises a deeper point. When people witness something they can't explain, their minds try to make sense of it, and sometimes that process leads to unexpected places. But let's not get distracted. The real strength of the Rendlesham case lies in its documentation and consistency. Multiple trained observers, over several nights, all reporting similar things. Physical evidence, audio recordings, official memos. It's not just a tale, it's a case file, and no one has come forward with a solid explanation that accounts for all of it. Weather balloon doesn't match. Lighthouse doesn't fly. Secret military tech possible, but why test it near a foreign airbase and let it be seen? What if it really was something not from this world? Think about this. When so many rational, competent individuals, people whose jobs depend on clear observation and level-headed thinking, tell the same story, shouldn't we listen? Not blindly believe, but truly listen. Rendlesham invites us to do just that. It asks us to sit with the uncomfortable possibility that we are not in full control of our skies, that maybe there are visitors, or watchers, or something else entirely. The British government kept quiet for years. Officially, they said the events were of no defense significance, but if that's true, why are documents still missing? Why did it take pressure from the public and media to release even basic information? Why was there no full investigation, despite the involvement of high-ranking officers? When we look back at Rendlesham, we're not just looking at lights in a forest. We're looking at the limits of our understanding. We're relooking at a moment when our neat definitions of what's real and what's impossible began to crack. And maybe that's the most important part. Because if something truly unexplained did land in that forest, if only for a few minutes, then our entire view of the world needs to expand. Maybe it is time we stop rolling our eyes and start looking up with curiosity instead of fear. Rendlesham wasn't about hysteria. It was about a mystery grounded in discipline, credibility, and unanswered questions. And sometimes, the most powerful evidence isn't a photo or a video, it's the silence that follows when the truth doesn't fit our expectations. Let's shift our gaze to South America, a region often overlooked in mainstream UFO discussions, but one rich with some of the most compelling sightings on record. Among them stands a case from Brazil, an event so strange, so well documented, and so disturbing that it still leaves even hardened skeptics without answers. It's called the Colares incident, and it didn't involve a single craft or a fleeting sighting. It involved an entire town, months of terror, and dozens of injuries. This wasn't a story passed down over the years, it was a full-blown military investigation, recorded in real time. The year was 1977. The place was Caleres, a small island town at the mouth of the Amazon River. Life was simple there, quiet, peaceful. That is, until the sky began to glow. People started reporting strange lights, bright, silent objects hovering above houses, following individuals at night, even shooting beams of light at them. But this wasn't just psychological fear. Many locals suffered physical effects: burns, puncture marks, headaches, weakness. Some claimed the lights sucked blood from their bodies, leaving small wounds. Panic set in. Entire families fled into the jungle or slept together outside in groups, too afraid to stay indoors. The local authorities were overwhelmed. Doctors began documenting the injuries. And eventually, the Brazilian Air Force stepped in and launched what became known as Operação Prato, Operation Saucer. It was one of the most extensive military investigations into UFOs ever conducted in Latin America. And unlike many cases where evidence is vague or lost, this operation produced hundreds of pages of reports, photographs, sketches, and eyewitness testimonies. Officers observed the phenomena themselves. They tracked the objects. They took pictures. One photo in particular, still debated today, shows a glowing disc-shaped object hovering over the trees. No wings, no blades, just silent light. The lead investigator, Captain Whedon J. Olinda, was initially skeptical. He thought people were exaggerating or mistaking normal phenomena. But as the operation progressed, he too began to change. He saw things. He spoke to too many terrified, sincere people. He gathered data that simply didn't match any known explanation. Years later, after retiring from the Air Force, Hollanda gave an explosive interview where he confirmed the authenticity of the sightings and claimed the military knew more than they were willing to admit. Tragically, not long after that interview, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was suicide. But of course, many believe otherwise. Now, here's where we need to pause and breathe, because this story isn't about aliens landing in the jungle or abducting people. It's about something stranger. It's about sustained contact and interaction between something unknown and a human population over time. That's rare. Most UFO stories last a few minutes, an hour at most. But Caleres, it went on for months. That's not a flash in the pan. That's a pattern. Skeptics have tried to explain it away. They've pointed to insects, hallucinations, mass hysteria. But mass hysteria doesn't leave radiation burns. It doesn't produce consistent reports from unrelated individuals. It doesn't make Air Force officers change their beliefs. And let's not forget, these weren't just average citizens. Some of the witnesses were police, doctors, military personnel. Their stories aligned, and they weren't seeking fame. In fact, many were afraid to talk. But the deeper question here isn't what those objects were. It's what they were doing. Why target a small town in Brazil? Why those specific people? Why the beams of light? Was it observation? Experimentation? Mistaken intent? And why did it suddenly stop? One theory suggests that Caleres was an accidental hotspot, a place where these unknown entities were studying human biology in ways we can understand. Another, more unsettling theory is that the town was a testing ground, and the people of Caleres were caught in the middle of something far bigger, something not meant for public eyes. And yet, despite all the documentation, most people have never heard of the Caleres incident. It's rarely covered in mainstream UFO media, maybe because it's too real, too visceral. It doesn't leave room for jokes about flying saucers and little green men. It's a reminder that whatever is out there or up there might not always be benign. But there's also a strange beauty in the Caleres story. Not in the fear or the pain, but in the fact that so many people stood together. That doctors, journalists, and investigators chose to record what was happening rather than run from it. That in the face of the unknown, humans still did what we do best: observe, question, and seek understanding. Sometimes, the truth hides in plain sight, not in headlines or blockbusters, but in forgotten villages, old reports, and the eyes of those who dared to look up. The Caleres incident isn't just a story of fear, it's a story of witnesses. And their silence, their pain, their truth, it all demands to be heard. Because maybe the real question isn't whether UFOs exist. Maybe the question is, why do they keep coming back? Sometimes, the most haunting mysteries don't come from military witnesses or deep forests. They come from commercial pilots, high above the earth, flying across quiet skies with nothing but clouds and stars around them. One of the most compelling cases in this category took place in Japan in during an ordinary cargo flight across the Pacific Ocean. But what Japan Airlines Flight 1628 encountered on that night was anything but ordinary. It was massive, it was strange, and it was witnessed by multiple experienced crew members over a period of nearly an hour. Captain Kenju Teruchi, a former fighter pilot with over 10,000 hours of flight experience, was flying a Boeing 747 cargo plane from Paris to Tokyo. As they flew over Alaska, cruising at 35,000 feet, the crew suddenly noticed two unusual objects to their left. They weren't just lights. They had structure, size, and were flying in formation. The crew thought it might be military aircraft, but there were no flight plans in the area, and air traffic control saw nothing on radar. Then, the situation escalated. The two objects began moving, erratically making sudden maneuvers, rising and falling, flashing lights. Terauchi reported that the objects were metallic, glowing, and far larger than anything he had ever seen. And then, as if that weren't enough, a third, much larger object appeared behind the plane. Terauchi described it as twice the size of an aircraft carrier. With a shape like a giant walnut and emitting bursts of light, the crew was shocked, and the captain requested a change of altitude and course. Permission was granted, but the object followed them. For nearly 50 minutes, the massive UFO maintained a close distance. Sometimes it would disappear from visual sight but then reappear. Despite their disbelief, the crew remained calm and professional. This wasn't a moment of panic, it was one of deep, quiet tension. The kind you feel when you know you're seeing something you're not supposed to. What makes this case especially important is that air traffic controllers and NORAD radar both picked up unusual signals that matched parts of the flight crew's testimony. This wasn't just anecdotal, it was backed up by data. And yet, shortly after the incident, something curious happened. The Japanese government quickly went quiet. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration began its own investigation, and while initially open about the case, the findings were soon buried. Terauchi was quietly grounded and reassigned to a desk job. The message was clear: don't talk about this. But Terauchi never changed his story. He gave interviews, explained the event in detail, and never once faltered. He didn't want attention. He wanted people to know that something unexplainable was flying in our skies. And to this day, the sighting remains one of the best documented and longest-lasting encounters between a commercial aircraft and a UFO in history. So what do we do with stories like this? They challenge our assumptions. They don't fit into our categories of normal or impossible. And yet, there they are, persistent, documented, real. We try to explain them away with whether optical illusions or secret technology. And sometimes, those explanations are enough, but not always. Sometimes, the evidence is too strong. The witnesses are too credible. The questions are too loud to ignore. The Japan Airlines incident asks us to consider that our skies may not be ours alone, that what we think is empty space might in fact be watched. And not just by satellites or other countries, but by something else. Something that doesn't follow our rules or recognize our boundaries. Something advanced, and perhaps something curious. And that brings us to the fifth and final case, one that doesn't involve a plane or a pilot. It involves thousands of people, a global audience, and something caught live on national television. In 1997, the skies over Phoenix, Arizona lit up with a string of lights that changed the UFO conversation forever. The Phoenix Lights, as they came to be known, were seen by over 10,000 people. The event lasted several hours and spanned hundreds of miles. It began with a massive V-shaped formation of lights silently flying overhead, blocking out the stars, witnessed by people from all walks of life: doctors, lawyers, police officers, children, military veterans. It then evolved into a series of stationary glowing orbs that remained in the sky for over an hour. What makes the Phoenix Lights different is the scale. This wasn't a lone observer in the woods or a single flight crew. This was a citywide multi-angle sighting witnessed by thousands and recorded from different locations. Phone calls flooded 911 centers. News outlets scrambled for coverage. People stood in the streets pointing upward, stunned. The U.S. military later said it was flares dropped during a training exercise. But flares don't move in formation. Flares don't fly silently for miles and block out the sky. Flares don't hang in the air in perfect symmetry. Witness, even Arizona's then Governor who had initially mocked the sighting, later admitted he had seen the lights too and described the craft as otherworldly. It's this mass experience that gives the Phoenix Lights their power, because it's not about believing one person. It's about recognizing a moment when thousands of people witnessed the same impossible thing. And yet, even with all that evidence, the official story remains unchanged. No investigation, no disclosure, just a quiet shrug from authorities and a lingering silence. But maybe that silence says more than words ever could. Because these 5 cases, each unique, each baffling, share one important thing. They remain unexplained, not because of lack of evidence, but often in spite of it. And they invite us to ask questions we're not used to asking. What else is out there? What don't we know? What aren't we being told? The sky above us is vast, and what we know about it, even after all these years, is still so small. But maybe, just maybe, the truth has always been there, just waiting for us to finally look up and accept that we're not the only ones watching. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the unexplained. These stories aren't just about lights in the sky, they're about our place in the universe, our hunger for answers, and our courage to face the unknown. Whether you believe in extraterrestrial visitors or not, one thing is clear: the mystery is real, and it deserves to be explored. So next time you look up, ask yourself, what if someone, or something, is looking back? Stay curious, stay open-minded, and never stop asking questions. See you in the next mystery.